country whose economy is so big and its ability to affect our economy is so significant that the way they get what they want is that they don't have to go and invade countries. They can slowly but surely buy them off. Now, they either buy them off with aid, like we've seen in some South Pacific island countries, some countries in Africa, and even parts of the Middle East. But the other way they get what they want is by becoming the biggest customer of any one country. And while they are not the biggest customer of Australia, they are a very big customer of Australia, which is why, to punish Australia for embarrassing China by wanting to hold them accountable to work out what happened with a virus that's now killed over 1 million people, destroyed the Western world, and essentially made the year of 2020, as my dear friends Betty and Daniel would say, an asterisk. They've used a thing called economic coercion. This is where you do exactly what they've done when it comes to barley, to beef, to wine, to steel, to coal, which is to find reasons for it not to be sold in China. The expectation there is that the business community fire up, the government back down, and China gets what it wants. But there are lots of other ways that China gets what it wants, and they are all very active, just as active as the economic coercion that is being played out on Australia right now. You may have heard of a thing called the Five Eyes. No, it is not some sort of spooky thing that they do YouTube videos about who really runs the world. But these 5 countries, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, the UK and Canada, all share intelligence information. They all are very aware of the games that China plays. And that means that we essentially work together as a unity of freedom to guarantee that freedom will always be on the front foot. Now, these Five Eyes countries have turned around and have, in the past, talked about things like needing to fight back against the economic coercion that China is purporting to plan and is planning and is doing against Australia right now. And this Five Eyes sharing of intelligence annoys many, of course, in China, because the more countries that work together to fight for the West, the harder it is for China to get their hooks into the West to be able to get away with whatever the heck it wants to do. The South China Morning Post clearly quoting there that the Five Eyes may be poked out because we decided to say that the deal that China did with Britain, and therefore the West, that Hong Kong would end up as an essentially autonomous authority for another few decades. Well, that deal, of course, they decided to change. They signed the deal, they knew the dates, but they changed it. And the Five Eyes organisations tried to stand up for the freedom of Hong Kong, but essentially that fight is now lost. Why? Well, because we know in the West that China owns so much of the debt. We know in the West that China owns so much of the business. We know in the West that China has the capacity to create damage for the economies of the very 5 nations that you are talking about. Now, one of those Five Eye countries is Canada. Their Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau. Here he is in blackface, as he appeared multiple times, and then, of course, even after it was exposed that he was in blackface, here he is being re-elected as Canada's Prime Minister. Now, remember, Canada is part of Five Eyes. This is next-level stuff about a brotherhood or sisterhood of nations that share intelligence information. Well, guess what? China has found a way to get its hooks into one of the Five Eyes. There was an amazing story that you probably didn't hear much about over the past few days. Canada, according to secret leaked military documents, was going to have Chinese soldiers doing military exercises in cold weather in Canada. Because you see, Justin Trudeau is one of these lefty politicians who thinks that there's something benevolent about China. That China is, basically, if it's just given a chance to be a normal country, then it will be a normal country. This is the same logic that leads to free trade deals that they ignore, to deals like Hong Kong that they ignore, to giving them things like the Olympics, which don't free up the internet access, or anything like that. Instead, these documents were obtained by, among others, rebel media and local newspapers in Canada, and they show outright that Canada is one of the Five Eyes that had the other one of its 2 eyes looking towards China. Remember, think about this. Five Eyes, all the information is on the Canadian Prime Minister's desk, yet the Canadian Prime Minister says it's okay for China to learn how to fight a war in cold weather in North America. This is how some of the media has reacted to it in Canada in the past couple of days, now openly saying that Canada is dangerously compliant to China. So one of the ways China gets what it wants is by playing to the vanity of a politician, in this case Justin Trudeau, to pretend that there'll be more trade deals, better relationships if you just let us do what we want. In this case, training in cold weather in North America. Another way that China gets its hooks into people is that they slowly but surely work on MPs. Now, the way they work on these MPs is they don't give them a bundle of money up front. They don't pay off these MPs. But what they do is they end up introducing them to the local community who donate to their political parties, who help move blocks of votes to help them achieve their personal power game of winning a seat in Congress in the United States, the Parliament in Canada, the Parliament in the US, the Parliament here, and even our own ASIO authorities are telling MPs, they told them this year, be very careful about these networks trying to get into your office. Because while they're not going to be able to get into the Prime Minister's office, if they can get into a backbencher's office, they play the long game. Because the backbencher will eventually become an assistant minister, the assistant minister becomes a minister, the minister becomes a cabinet minister, and then just like the Five Eyes situation, you end up with somebody arguing inside the room from a perspective that is deeply bought off and deeply in trouble because of how complicit it is towards China. In the United States, perfect example of this. Again, you wouldn't have heard about it on the 6 p.m. news because it's not about the Orange Man. But in the United States, Axios, which is one of those online sites which is all about politics for people who love politics, and it's all about insider games about how politics works. It's, yes, anti-Trump and all the rest of it. But they had an amazing report about how Chinese spies got inside the politics of California. And what they did is they played the long game. They identified people at the local council level, and they decided to introduce those people to the communities, form relationships, and even one spy is accused of having a sexual relationship with not one but two mayors at the local level. Now, sometimes these bets pay off, with a local nobody from a local council eventually either becomes the mayor or becomes the governor or becomes a member of the parliament in the United States. Like this guy, a congressman called Eric Swalwell, and he has been a congressman since 2012. He even ran for president in the 2020 Democrat electoral cycle. Now, this bloke is, of course, somebody who's been able to move from local council into the federal parliament, from the federal parliament into and onto the intelligence committee. So think too about that Five Eyes situation. And this bloke was on the very committee that was investigating Donald Trump, that tried to impeach Donald Trump. Why? Russia, 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 Russia. In fact, he said as much on MSNBC earlier this year.
I am concerned that we don't know what we need to know about Donald Trump to protect the country from what Russia has on him. We have deep suspicions, and all of the arrows continue to point in the same direction.
So guess where this story is going? Axios revealed that he was very close, let me put it that way, very close to, guess what? A Chinese spy who backed him in all the way from local government to federal government to the intelligence committee. And the very person who led the impeachment process against Donald Trump, who endlessly said that Russia had something on Trump, despite the fact there is no evidence, and there's never been evidence of Russia having something on Trump. Well, China has something on this bloke. But he says, oh, we never discussed any sensitive material. As we're supposed to believe, Trudeau never discussed anything sensitive. But you see, that's not the game. The game is not the expectation that Justin Trudeau picks up the phone and tells President Xi what he's doing. Instead, it's about having someone in the final room of decision-making who is there to think of it from the Chinese perspective. That's what weakens our effort to be able to push back against China, who want the rest of the world to be like them. And anyone who stops them being the worst of what they are, locking up people based on their faith, depersoning people. And that means not letting them ride public transport, not letting them have a bank account if they are considered to be someone who is not all on board with the cause. This is the governmental version of cancel culture, where as soon as somebody's on the wrong side of an imaginary line, they don't exist anymore. They can literally go everywhere from prison to poverty and all in between, but they will never get to play normal life again. So what did Eric Swalwell's boss, Nancy Pelosi, say after this story had been revealed? It was not revealed on a right-wing blog. It was not a conspiracy theory of cable television. It wasn't something that bubbled up via Twitter. Instead, it was a credible report that came from Axios, with the photos to prove it. What did she say? Well, this.
We saw cold, hard evidence of the Trump campaign, indeed the Trump family, eagerly intending to collude possibly with Russia, a hostile foreign power, to influence American elections.
So she was happy to repeat the line and lies about Trump, but when it comes to Swalwell, she says nothing to see here. She can personally decide, and she is third in line to the US presidency. If the president and vice president, for whatever horrible reason, got into trouble and were unable to serve, the Speaker of the House becomes the president. And this person sees no threat in a Chinese spy who's cultivated a relationship with this bloke, from local government to the federal parliament to the intelligence committee. Nothing to see here. The other way that China gets what it wants is for people to just do their bidding without even being asked. You all remember the Hunter Biden story. The Hunter Biden story that was on one of the oldest newspapers in the United States. Now, it started off as a whole story about Hunter Biden, the son of the then former vice president, working for a Ukrainian gas company, even though he did no work beforehand. And clearly this was some sort of a payoff to, well, curry favour with the establishment of the United States. Let's put that as the nicest way. But as the internal documents of his own laptop, which has been investigated for 2 years by the FBI, claim to show, is that the money that he gets out of these companies, and guess what, out of China, is all about buying access back to Dad. Back to Dad as a former vice president and now future president. The Electoral College will meet on Tuesday of this week in the United States. And pending any other court shenanigans, it would vote to make Joe Biden the next president. His son is accused of doing financial deals with China that he had no experience to put in place and no real knowledge of the business that he was involved in. Instead, all of this was written off as Russian disinformation. Just like the guy who claimed Donald Trump is fully in hoc with Russia, while literally he was in a relationship that followed him all the way from local council to federal government. The same political establishment say that the reality of the story about Biden was fake. And of course, the whole reason why this story had to be fake was because it wasn't good for Joe Biden. It wasn't good for Joe Biden to have a son who was doing business deals with countries that you wouldn't think he was either A, qualified for in areas like gas, or why would he be getting hundreds of millions of dollars out of Chinese banks for businesses? Why would a former business partner turn around and say, yeah, part of the money that was coming from, among others, China was going back to Dad? And even if the ultimate defence was he's a former politician, he's about to be the President of the United States. This is what matters. This is how China plays the long game. They do it with backbenchers in our state parliaments, be it in the upper or lower house. They do it with the billionaire business class here. They do it with the universities. They do it with former this, that and the others, from former significant Australian politicians at the federal level and at the state level. They play the long game. So somebody is always arguing their case back in the room, just like Canada in the Five Eyes, just like that bloke on the Intelligence Committee, and just like potentially the upcoming President of the United States. Now, we learn that despite the fact that the Jedi mind trick during the election campaign was this story doesn't exist, it does exist. It has always existed. And now the very same organisations that pretended it wasn't true during the election, now that they have got rid of the orange man and they get their guy in the White House in Biden, now they're willing to report on things, including NBC, that said Hunter Biden's tax inquiry is to focus on, guess what? His Chinese dealings. On the right, they're getting information that there is even more subpoenas coming about the relationships that this bloke has put in place. Is this bloke the back door to the next president of the United States? A bloke who welcomed China to the WTO, who literally toasted them at the White House when he was a heartbeat away from the presidency. That's why this matters. They play the long game, and we get called conspiracy theorists when we see the game they're playing. China is not a normal country. Chinese Australians, fine. Cool, normal. Welcome to the country. Enjoy yourself. But the dictatorship in China is not normal. It must be resisted. But that also means we have to do our best to have a look at all of the different ways they've got themselves into all of the different parts of Western society to do the bidding for them. Is it about to be the President of the United States? That's a frightening 4 years ahead. But of course the media will say nothing to see here.